Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to my alphabet of favourite films, and we're at the letter R. I thought the letter R would have more films, but it doesn't actually have that many, quite surprisingly, even though I've probably forgotten some and just haven't seen some. So again, this series is interactive, so please make your list of your favourite films beginning with the letter R, because I'm always excited to see it, even if my wallet isn't. So we'll make a start. These are in no particular order. So start with Jean Renoir's Les Règles du Jeu, or Rules of the Game. This is a lovely Criterion DVD set, and it's Renoir's lovely little social comedy about the class system in France, and kind of social satire starring Renoir appears himself. It's a film I haven't seen for a while, but when I did watch it, it's really quite wonderful. I do need to revisit it. That's Les Règles du Jeu. Next is Hideo Nakata's Ring, or Ringu. This is a film that, if you've seen it, you'll remember watching it. It's famous really for one scene, which is unforgettable even if you haven't watched it for 20 years. But the rest of the film is dark and brooding. One of the flagship films for the J-horror craze that happened in the late 90s, early 2000s. He also directed Dark Water, which is a lovely little film, not quite as impactful as Ring. He went to America to direct the the remakes, with Naomi Watts, which I have never seen, but you can maybe let me know what they're like if you've seen them. Next is Rudderless. This is a film directed by William H. Macy. This is the Plain Archive edition, which is very nice, as Plain Archive editions are. Obviously you have the actual film, but you have nice cards, but you also get a guitar pick, which is very lovely. The film stars Billy Crudup and Anton Yelchin, and they have a nice little tribute, R.I.P. to Anton Yelchin, who obviously tragically died now 4 years ago at the age of 27. Very much like Janis Joplin and Jim Morrison and Kurt Cobain. 27 seems to be the year to die if you're in the arts. This is a beautiful little film. It's about the death of Billy Crudup's son in a school shooting, and he kind of drops out from society, from his highly paid advertising job, to live in a boat His ex-wife dumps some of his son's stuff, and his son was a budding songwriter, so he kind of reconnects to his son through his son's music, and happens to play one of the songs at an open mic night hosted in a bar, and the barman's William H. Macy, and Anton Yelchin thinks it's good, and then they end up forming a band. Anton Yelchin's character has problems of his own. I mean, there's a lot of it that is predictable. There's a couple of things that aren't as predictable. It looks beautiful. It's beautifully shot. Lawrence Fishburne turns up in a nice role as a owner of a music shop. It's just a really beautiful little film. Billy Crudup's fantastic in it. It's got a nice little score. Yeah, highly recommend checking out. Again, a lot of it is predictable, but it still works. And then there's a couple of little bits that aren't quite as predictable. Yeah, that's Rudderless. Next is a film that I recently did a random review on, Peter Medak's The Ruling Class. Just an amazing film, but starring Peter O'Toole, Alistair Sim, Arthur Lowe, Harry Andrews. About a man who becomes the latest Earl, but he thinks he's Jesus. He gets cured, and ends up being the reincarnation of Jack the Ripper. It's got social satire, it's got musical numbers. Doesn't always work, but it's quite the sight. It's 2.5 hours long, but with Peter O'Toole and a magnetic performance, it certainly doesn't feel that. You're kind of just agog for most of it. Great use of people just starting singing little songs. It's just... Next on the list is Pure Cheese. It's Rounders with Matt Damon and Edward Norton and Famke Janssen and John Malkovich with a wonderful over-the-top Russian accent. Be the man, he's money. Terrific stuff. It's directed by John Dahl. About poker, about gambling. It's a lot of fun. Complete nonsense. But worth seeing for John Malkovich because it's a great, very silly performance. Next on the list is one of my favourite films of all time, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, the only film directed by Tom Stoppard, and it features the two minor characters from Hamlet, and it follows them as they skirt around the Hamlet story, pretty much being baffled by what the hell's going on and having no idea. Also stars Ian Glenn as Hamlet, and Richard Dreyfuss as the leader of a bunch of travelling players that play their part in the story. This was made in 1990. I think I saw it a few years after, still in the 90s. So it's been with me for a lot of years. It's just, the script is immaculate. It's just wonderful. The relationship between Tim Roth and Gary Oldman is just wonderful. It's one of the best on-screen pairings. Gary Oldman's the slightly denser one. It's just a beautiful film. It has a lovely kind of brown tone to it, but the script is the thing. Tom Stoppard's script is just wonderful. Lots of wordplay. It's just a great film, and I would urge you to check it out. It might not be everybody's cup of tea, but it's amazing. Next is Rollerball with James Caan. I don't think I really need to say too much about it. You've probably all seen it, but it stands up really well, and I think is more kind of prescient as the days roll by. Violence is entertainment. It's just great. It's another wonderful Jimmy Caan 70s performance. Yeah, just a fun film. Don't go anywhere near the remake with LL Cool J. It's really bad. Next is Rogue Male, another Peter O'Toole film. This is actually a television film. This is from the same story that Fritz Lang's Manhunt with Walter Pidgeon was made. It's perhaps not a brilliant film, but again, another great Peter O'Toole performance, as somebody, a hunter, who almost takes a pot shot at Hitler, and is then chased by the Germans. It's quite fantastic, and again, another, well, to me, it was a lost Peter O'Toole performance, but you can't have enough Peter O'Toole. Next is a great little creature feature. This is Rogue, from the director of Wolf Creek, which was a fairly nasty little serial killer film from Australia. This is a perfect example of less is more. It's a bunch of tourists getting trapped on an island and the water's pretty much creeping up, and it just so happens to be in the territory of a rogue crocodile. It's really well done. Again, you don't really see a lot, which is good, because obviously with a bigger budget you'd probably see more. Again, it's not a masterpiece. It doesn't have the meaning of life in it, but it's a really well executed creature feature with genuinely scary moments in it. Next is the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which for years was my favourite musical of all time, even though I think the past 18 months or so Phantom of the Paradise has now taken over the top spot. But there's so much to like about it. Still quite subversive. Got a great soundtrack. One of Tim Curry's essential performances. Just a lot of fun. Next is another film that up until recently I hadn't seen, or I may have seen it decades ago but never really paid it much attention, or perhaps wasn't of an age to actually appreciate it properly. This is Robin and Marion, and it's another Richard Lester masterpiece. He of How I Won the War and The Bed Sitting Room. This is a premium collection, so it's finally in Region B. It's just an amazing film. It's about aging. It's about mortality. It's Robin Hood, jaded and old, not able to do what he used to do. It's got an amazing cast. Sean Connery, Audrey Hepburn as Maid Marian, Robert Shaw as the Sheriff of Nottingham, having an absolute blast. Ian Holm, Richard Harris, Denham Elliott, Ronnie Barker. The cast is phenomenal. They're all doing great work. Sean Connery doesn't mind showing his grey hair and the fact he's balding. It's just a wonderful film. It's actually, I'm in no way in any shape or form romantic but it is actually quite a romantic film, but realistic about it. It's got a wonderful ending. Everything about it is just amazing, so well made. It's got a great script and the performances are out of this world. Nazar and Prod recently did a video on it, which I'll put a link in the description. You should check it out because he probably did a better job of explaining it than I have. It's just stunning, and this will definitely make the short list from the long list of Alphabet favourite films. It's just fantastic. If you haven't seen it, or you haven't seen it for a while, revisit it because it's amazing. I think it does get better the older you get. You know, myself in my 20s probably wouldn't really appreciate it as much as I do now. The next is a film that you don't really watch that often, The Road. But it's a really good film, but it is downbeat as hell. Directed by John Hillcoat, starring Viggo Mortensen, not in The Lord of the Rings. It's just a stunningly grim post-apocalyptic film. There's not a lot of hope or light in it. It's grim, everything's dirty and foul, but there's a strange beauty to it, and the performances are great. It looks beautiful and horrible. It is one of those beautiful, horrible films. Yeah, fantastic. You can pick it up. I think I picked this up for £2 or £3. Not really talked about, but it really should be. But because it's unrelentingly grim, it probably isn't mentioned as much as it should be. Next is The Riverman. Apologies for this bloody awful cover. This is a great little serial killer film starring Bruce Greenwood, the ever dependable Bruce Greenwood, and Carrie Ellis, who actually plays Ted Bundy, and he plays him actually very well. It's about the Green River killer in Seattle, and Bruce Greenwood is the investigator, who, very much like Will Graham in Manhunter, when he is in a case or involved in a case, he does it gets into his head a little bit too much, and he goes and consults Ted Bundy in prison to get essentially into the mindset of the Green River killer. It's a short film from 2010, but it's intelligent, it's really well done, well acted. Again, you wouldn't think Carrie Ellis, or Ulis, or I'm not actually sure how to pronounce his name, obviously. You wouldn't think he would be good casting for Ted Bundy, but he's actually very good. And like I said, Bruce Greenwood is excellent, as he always is. Just don't be put off by the terrible cover, because that is really bad cover. Next is The Right Stuff. Philip Kaufman's wonderful film about the early days of the space race. Again, a wonderful cast. Scott Glenn, Ed Harris, Lance Hendrickson, Dennis Quaid, Sam Shepard, Fred Ward, Barbara Hershey, Veronica Cartwright, who doesn't get abused by an alien. Yeah, I mean, it's a long film, 192 minutes, but with all great long films, it doesn't feel that long. It's just fascinating, riveting, just great stuff from The Right Stuff. Next is Jules Dessan's Rififi. Like I've said in previous videos, I always thought Jules Dessan was French, but he's actually American. But this is his French masterpiece, about a bunch of crooks doing a robbery, which is a wonderful set piece in silence. It's all about the kind of rules of the game, essentially. The la règle de jeu, if you will, of the criminal underworld. Yeah, it's a beautiful little film, classy, and one of the essential film noirs that you really should check out. Next is Richard Longcrane's highly entertaining Richard III with Ian McKellen. I think this was one of the first films I'd seen of Ian McKellen, and he's having an absolute blast as the titular Richard. Set in a kind of World War II era. It shouldn't really work, but it does work. But again, it's buoyed by Ian McKellen's wonderful performance. Robert Downey Jr.'s in it, slightly miscast. Annette Bening and Maggie Smith and Kirsten Scott Thomas. It's just a really enjoyable take on Richard III for people who perhaps don't really want to watch a really stagey version of Richard III. This is, got fire and bombs and war, if you prefer that kind of thing. Next is Quentin Tarantino's debut, and for me still his best film, because he had to be as economical as possible. Reservoir Dogs. You all know what it's about, but for me it's still his best film. It's probably his best performance as well, because he doesn't actually speak that much. This is a lovely Mondo Steelbook, because we know with Tarantino, if he was making Reservoir Dogs now, I mean, this is about an hour and a half. Reservoir Dogs now would be 2 3/4 hours. We would see Mr. Blonde shooting people in the bank heist. We would see the bank heist, and it wouldn't be near the film that this is. Great soundtrack. Believe it or not, in the UK, this was banned on home video, along with Bad Lieutenant. I think I saw it twice in the cinema, because again, you had the urban myth that in certain cuts you actually saw Michael Madsen cut the ear off, whereas obviously in the actual film he just pans away and you just hear the ear being cut off. I remember Emma Thompson saying this was the most violent film she'd ever seen, which is obviously complete nonsense. They are scenes that show you the result of violence. Tim Roth rolling about in the back of a car covered in blood isn't violence, it's the result of violence. And obviously Emma Thompson's never watched a James Bond film or a Star Wars film, which have more violence and higher body counts than Reservoir Dogs does. Tarantino, before he became self-indulgent and all of his films were bloated. If you haven't seen it for years, it's worth going back to actually seeing Tarantino when he was a little bit economical. Next is Requiem for a Dream. Again, another film that you wouldn't watch that often, but it has a kind of horrible beauty. Darren Aronofsky. I still prefer Pi, his little black and white strange debut. This has a great performance by Ellen Burstyn, and it's all about how fantastic drugs are. Yeah, you could watch this with The Road for a really enjoyable Saturday night's double bill. Next, slightly different. The Red Shoes by Phelim Pressburger. Don't need to say any more, really. It's one of those films that's just about perfect. It's about the sacrifice of life for art. Anton Walbrook is absolutely fantastic in it. Maris Goring's fantastic in it. Robert Helpman, Moira Shearer. It's, when you consider when it was made, what other British filmmakers were doing at the time, we all know Phelim Pressburger were like centuries ahead of their time. They were doing stuff that literally we could only dream of. It has so many wonderful lines, so many wonderful moments. You know, why do you want to dance? Why do you want to breathe? You know, it's all about art and why we love it, and it's Phelim Pressburger at their very best. It's slightly different. The Red Queen kills 7 times, which is a wonderful, fun giallo, starring Sybil Danning. It's just wonderful. It has an amazing dream sequence in it. Obviously there's 7 deaths, not to give away spoilers. It's a great film, so much fun, so colourful, as a lot of giallos were, or are. It's a great wee film. This is another wonderful film. It's Red Cliff by John Woo, which really took me by surprise, because obviously John Woo did sensational, amazing, influential, groundbreaking Hong Kong films, and then went to America and was essentially neutered, and for me didn't really do anything in America that's worth talking about. But then he went back to Hong Kong and did Red Cliff, which is just a wonderful period piece. It's quite long. Yeah, part 1's 145 minutes and part 2 is 141 minutes. But again, it never drags. If you can see it on the biggest screen possible, it's just sumptuous and luscious and just a wonderful experience. I wish you would just go back to Hong Kong permanently. Next is Kurosawa's Red Beard, or his Dr. Kildare, starring Toshiro Mifune. Sadly, the last collaboration with Kurosawa. Again, it's 185 minutes long. It doesn't seem that long. It's obviously beautifully composed shot composition, as you'd expect from the master. Even though it's just about Mifune's red beard, the doctor showing the student how to do it. It's just wonderful. Yeah, what more can you say? It's Kurosawa, it's Mifune. Speaking of which, Rashomon from 1950. One of the most influential Japanese films of all time. It kind of opened the door to the West, to Japanese cinema. It's not my favourite Kurosawa film, but it's still stunning. The whole concept of cinematic truth is something that quite a lot of films have kind of played with, because we as the audience, we kind of believe what we see in the story, even though it might be complete nonsense. Stars Toshiro Mifune in his most kind of visceral performance. Takashi Shimura, both the big hitters are here. And it's about 3 different perspectives of an event framed in this wonderful Rashomon gate, which is soaking wet. The compositions are just eye melting. Nobody's shot sunlight through leaves like that's shot in Rashomon. Kurosawa's use of the dynamic camera is here for all to see. It's just a stunning, visceral piece of work, and there's also like a flashback told by a ghost, which you kind of forget about, but there's actually a ghost flashback giving evidence of what happened. Not everything is as it seems. It's stonking, even though, like I said, not my favourite Kurosawa, but arguably one of his most important. Because could you imagine if we lived in a world without Japanese cinema, or without knowing about Japanese cinema? I mean, I know my life would be a lot different and more rubbish. Next is Rare Exports, A Christmas Story. This is a lovely little Finnish film. The director has went on to do Hollywood stuff, as sadly quite a lot of foreign filmmakers do. This is just a wonderful dark story about the real Santa Claus, because if anybody knows, the kind of mythos of St. Nicholas is actually quite dark, and this kind of tells that kind of story. It's funny, it's a little bit scary, it's just so much fun. I can't even remember how I first saw it. I had it in DVD and now got it in Blu-ray. It's so much fun, and it is a film that you can watch every Christmas to get the true spirit of Christmas. And finally, we might as well end up on a banger. It's Kurosawa's Ran. Again, not my favourite Kurosawa, but bloody hell is it magnificent. You want colour cinematography, you want images that will burn in the retina of your mind's eye for eternity. This is Kurosawa at his most bleak. Ran essentially means chaos. It's a loose kind of reworking as King Lear, but instead of daughters it's 3 sons. It's a work of terrible fatalistic decisions when you consider he was like 75 when he made this. It's like stunning. The ending is brutal, but again the film just has that kind of horrible, beautiful feel to it. Again, it's a more kind of stately camera rather than the kind of early peak dynamic camera that we're used to seeing from Kurosawa. This is a more stately. This in Kagemusha from 1980. This is 85. This one includes the AK documentary by Chris Marker, which is excellent. A bunch of extras. It's a brutal film, bleak. Yeah, again, it's another film that you need to see on the biggest screen possible. And again, one scene not forgotten. So that's Ran, and I think that's a pretty good way to end the video on my favourite films beginning with letter R. But again, please let me know your lists, because I thought there would be more films, but again, I've maybe completely forgotten 10. And obviously there'll be ones that I just haven't seen. Or there'll be ones sitting in my backlog. That's probably a better point. So thanks very much for watching. And hopefully you enjoyed it. And hopefully we'll see you for the letter S, which I believe follows the letter R. So thanks very much for watching. This is Solitude Ronin saying farewell.